cool. And welcome to our webinar again this week. And once again, thank you for choosing to spend some time with us. This week, as Hannah mentioned, I'm joined by Brian and Matthew, who are going to help us through some CatDV training. So this is all about CatDV media stores. And let's talk about what we're going to do. We're going to talk about what are CatDV media stores and why are they so cool. How to set them up, and this goes into some detail, right? This is tech training, so if you're hoping to see some extremely shiny, cool stuff that shows how the end results of media stores look, probably not going to do that. We're going to be going into the back end and doing quite a lot of technical configuration of how these things work and what they can do for us. So our agenda, I'm going to give an overview of media stores, and then Matthew's going to run through some media stores fundamentals, and here are some of the topics, and we're going to try and burn these into your minds over the next hour or so. Brian's then going to take over and show us some examples, film clips, audio proxies, subtitles path, as well as a discussion then on service permissions. So the reason we've got three of us on, it's not kind of how many CatDV experts does it take to explain media stores. You know, it's not kind of a setup for some kind of joke. It's kind of deliberate. So first rule of training: tell them what you're going to tell them it again, then tell them what you just told them. And so that is kind of the three of us are here to do just that. So we're going to try and explain things, probably even the same kind of things, in our own special and different ways. I'm not quite sure whether my one works. We'll find out as we go. If it resonates with just one person, then it would have been worth it, and it was a little bit of fun putting it together. So I'll kick us off anyway with number one. Let's dive straight in with what is a media store. So a media store is a mapping between your master media and other goodies, other stuff. That might be sidecar files, it might be proxies, film clips, subtitles, and we'll see examples of all these cool things as we go through. And the reason this is important is because CatDV only stores one path for a piece of master media. And what we're going to be talking about a lot on this webinar, and if you walk away with just one thing, it's that CatDV works with roots or base paths and then relative paths. And that's what these two different colors are for this particular file name. I'll come back to this example in just a minute. So I'll then dive into my example or explanation or analogy, which may be a little bit esoteric, but bear with me, right? So base location and relative path. These are the concepts I'm trying to talk about, and this is my way of trying to do that. So it's going to be, so what we can see here is a blueprint to my house, and there's a map to my house. So Google says, let's go to a particular house location. And then once I'm at my house, standing out in front of it, I want to find my way to the big chocolate cake. So I'm looking after my master media, the big chocolate cake, the cool stuff, the high res, amazing big cake. And I'm going to go in through my garage, turn left, go down the corridor, past the media room, into the kitchen, turn right, into the pantry, and there I will find my chocolate cake store. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. But I haven't got all that much room in my house, so I'm going to choose to delegate looking after some smaller, less hungry cakes to another location. And so my friend happens to have a house of exactly the same design. He happens to live in Cheltenham. It's Matthew's house. Exactly the same design house. It's a very successful house builder, obviously. And
I like how I didn't get the big cake, Dave. I mean, I think people who watch the webinars now know how this gig rolls, but I've got the cupcakes.
I've got all that hassle though. I've got to manage all the deliveries of kind of taking my massive cakes to the storage cube as I archive stuff off. I haven't got room in my pantry for so many cakes. You could have loads and loads of cupcakes.
And that's before we get onto your egress fees, but let's not go there. I'll let you go in.
So the bottom map is a different map, right? I've got to go to Cheltenham to Matthew's house. But then once I'm outside of his house, I'm going to take exactly that same path, the same relative path. I'm going to sneak in the garage, turn left, by the utility room, up the corridor, past the media room, through the kitchen, into the pantry, and I will find Matthew's stash of cakes. Brilliant, brilliant. But that's not everything that I want to store about my cakes. I really do like my cakes. I like to memorialize my cakes. I like to have some audio description about why my cakes are great, and I like to manage a store of still images about my cakes as well. And luckily, I've got another friend who's joining me on this webinar who happens to have the same style of house. He lives in Toronto, and that's Brian. There's Brian's house. So same kind of thing, really. I want to manage not just my master media, my big cakes, my proxies, my cupcakes, but a load of other related artifacts. I'm going to have some textual description, maybe some subtitles. That's where that's going. Maybe a still proxy so that we can preview stuff without having to scrub it. So turn up at Brian's house, sneak in through the garage, turn left, turn right, turn right, turn right again. I get into his pantry. Unfortunately, it's not quite so full of goodies, but I still find a filing cabinet, and it's got the Polaroid of the big cake in it and some narrative stuff about it as well. So the concept that I'm trying to talk about in this slightly cheesy way is that we have a base location. These are the maps at the bottom. And then we have a relative path that allows us to find the related artifact to my master media, my master cake in this case. So what we're trying to do is show with a media store how to map these master locations to your goodies. And the goodies are proxies, film strips, multitrack audio, subtitles, Premiere proxies, mezzanines. Start at the right place, follow a consistent path. And you're going to hear all three of us saying the same thing in different ways to try and help get the message across about how media stores work. So I'll start off with my examples. We had this media path that we looked at very briefly at the beginning. So in this case, I've got some nice edit storage, my creative SAN. And in my organization, I've chosen to organize things by company name, Acme, project number, project 654, and then media type. So I might have a set of folders for renders, FX, audio, rushes, project planning documentation, or whatever. And of course, this render is the best one, and it's an MXF format, so it's a nice master that I've made, maybe XDCAM or something. And that is the master media that CatDV manages, and it's the only path that CatDV stores in its database. Cool. So I'm going to break that into two bits. My root is my creative SAN, and my relative path, the path I'm taking through the garage, turn left, turn right, turn right, turn right again, in pink or purple, is our relative path. So I can then set up some mappings. So my media stores will let me set up a mapping, say, to some proxies. So my proxies might be on a different mount point, and the mount point is going to be different, but then the relative path is going to be the same. So in this case, Acme, project 2654, renders, but it's best1.mp4. And I can start to build some of these out. So here we go. Here's a film strip. It might be a JPEG. So I'm going to render that out to a different film strip root location or base location. I could put my mezzanines. Let's imagine we get inbound content in a whole range of formats. We might get some ARRI, some RED, some XDCAM, some P2, whatever it is. Bring all that in and then bring it all down to a nice ProRes mezzanine for my house format. I might want to be able to store my mezzanines there, and I can set up a media path mapping for that. Similarly, I might have some chums that insist on using Windows. And one of the things you can do with media stores is make it really simple to manage mixed Windows and Mac environments. So if some folks are using Windows, then what I'm doing here is saying, well, this Windows volume actually has the same stuff in it as the creative SAN. So this is a link to this is another link to the master media, albeit that's accessible via a Windows share rather than a Unix or Mac-based share. So it's still my best1.mxf, but it's mounted very differently, and it's got the Windows style backslashes rather than the Unix and Mac style forward slashes, which CatDV can then just automatically translate. And Brian will show us some cool stuff. In fact, both those guys will show some cool stuff around that. But of course, not all workflows are file-based, even though, given these examples, we can also handle with these media stores the ability to manage object storage or cloud storage. And in this case, here is a proxy, my same proxy that I just happened to have hosted in some S3U location. The same rules apply. We've still got our relative path, Acme, project 654, renders, best one, but the root is now a URL for some cloud storage. Cool. So why is that good? Well, number one, it's transparent. It's really easy to see where your proxies are, really easy to see where your mezzanines are, really easy for humans to traverse that stuff. It's easier to add new types. A few months ago, we didn't have a subtitle type, and it's quite easy to add new ones. It's quite easy to extend them. Let's imagine you wanted to have some print workflow, which managed the print-ready huge stills as well as lower quality versions for different purposes, review and approve, sharing, web views, or whatever. You can add new custom types. These proxies can, or these these related artifacts can be shared. So for example, we can send our CatDV proxies straight into Adobe, and you'll have seen, if you've been following these webinars, that we did exactly that when sharing those proxies with a remote workflow very quickly and easily using our Premiere panel. It's a very cool workflow that's very popular right now. And ultimately, even though some of this stuff looks quite complicated, what it's doing is hiding away complexity from the user. So the user just wants to get their stuff, and they want it to be available to them right now, irrespective of whether someone else ingested it on a Mac or Windows or it's a mezzanine. Just get me my stuff. So that's why it's cool, and it really is pretty cool. So let's hand over to Matthew, who can tell us how to set some of this stuff and some of the core principles behind setting them up in a effective way.
Thanks, Dave. And all that chat of cakes made me a bit hungry now, but there we are. That's what happens, isn't it? Let me get up and running. So if your media stores look like this, then this is definitely the webinar for you. Okay. Now, there might be a couple of reasons why you haven't got any media store configuration. We introduced them in Server 7, so they're, I wouldn't say new concept, but they've not been in the product since the dawn of time. So there were older ways of doing things, something called path mapping, but we're not going to go into that today. I'd say for newer systems, or if you're doing upgrades and things, our recommended way to configure your system is now through media stores. And in fact, the web client needs them to work. So, but don't worry, if you have got a media store configuration like that, but just to say, ideally it shouldn't. So we do sometimes get support calls about this. So key concept number one that I'm going to introduce is that CatDV only stores one location in the database for a file or a clip. So if you were to go and look in the database and see where a piece of media lives, you're not going to find a link to the proxy. You're not going to find a link to the subtitle files, that sort of thing. Everything else is calculated using this media store concept. So remember that concept, only one location stored in the database for a clip. So a common problem that people come to us is that they're starting to use the web client. So maybe they've got a traditional system and they're adding the web client and they don't have any proxies online in the web. And for those of you that have used CatDV for a while, will know that in the desktop client, we've had this sort of traffic light indicator showing you whether the full res, that's the F column, is online, or the P, the proxy, is online. So green for online, red for offline. We added this into server 9. So you now get this traffic light indicator. And it's in the web client, it's from the perspective of the server. So this is whether the server can see those files. If you're working in the desktop client, then it's whether the desktop client can see those files. So this is a common problem. And what I've got here is I've created a view in my web client that just shows you the media path. So this is the path to the high res. So you can see that my high res lives in mount storage, media uploads, etc., etc. That's where the MOV files are. But for some reason, the web client can't get to those files. So, and I've got that system here as well. So let me just log in, and I've got a catalog called Unfiled Web Uploads. So there you go. There's some clips that the high res are online and the proxies are not. So I'm just going to open the web admin interface in another tab. So if you're familiar with the server administration in the web, it is worth noting that media stores can be configured in the desktop and they can also be configured in the worker. I'm a millennial, so I have to do everything in the web, don't I? It's sort of mandatory. So I'm going to do my configuration in here for the media stores.
It is also best practice, right? So configure CatDV as much as possible back to using the web application. And
we're actually adding more and more settings and configuration to support, those of you who've been on previous webinars, to support, move to containerization. The idea is that you should be able to do everything through the web. That's what we're moving towards. So here's my media storage section, and the shocked cat, no doubt, will be in horror because I don't have any media stores. So my clips live in mount storage. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a media store. So I'm going to press this button here, add media store, and I'm going to give it a name. And I'm going to be super original and call it Matthew. You probably want to give your media store a slightly better name than that, but there we go. So I've got a media store called Matthew. And I'm just going to hide myself because I'm in a way some of the buttons here. The next thing I want to do is click on this media store, and I'm going to add a path. And when I add a path, you'll see that I get a selection of path types, okay, that are relevant to me. And Brian's going to talk a little bit more about path types later. So for now, I'm going to add in a high-res path, which should match my clips, which is mount storage media. So I'm going to add in that high-res path. So this is telling CatDV that any clips that live in this location are part of this media store. And the next thing I need to do is tell the media store where the web proxies are going to live. So again, I click on my media store and I add a path and I say web proxy video. And these are going to live in mount storage proxies. So I've got mount storage media for my high res, mount storage proxies for my low res. And if I refresh the page on my catalog, it's always a worrying moment. Have I done something right? But there we go. Green lights on the full res, green lights on the proxy. And I should now have playable proxies that I can, scrub through as you would expect in the web client. So that is a very basic configuration, but let's move on through there. Oh, something I didn't show you, which is quite useful, is if you're on the server, you can press this slow online status, and this is just checking the existence of those paths from the point of view of the CatDV server. So this is a Matthew top trick if you're troubleshooting media stores and things not working in the web. This could be a really good one to check whether the server can actually access those paths just by clicking that show online status. And yeah, so just to recap, so as Dave mentioned before, for my clip, the path in the database was mount storage media. That was the root path. And then the relative path was everything in pink. So when it picks up the proxy path, effectively, it's going to take mount storage proxies as the root for the proxy, and then it's going to add on everything in the in pink, effectively, which is going to give me the full path to the proxy. So in Dave's analogy, the mount storage media is London. That's his house. The mount storage proxies is Cheltenham, my house. But the route to get to the goodies is the same, regardless of where, with these relative paths. So yeah. Key concept number 2 is that mixed platforms need multiple paths. So if you're running in a pure Mac environment, so you've got a Mac server, Mac clients, Mac workers, then that's absolutely fine. You don't need to do this. But what we see with many of our customers now is they might have a Windows server, they might have Mac edit clients, and media stores, gives you the ability to deal with that. And in fact, when a client makes a request, so that could be the desktop client, it could be an NLE panel or something like that, we know which platform is asking. So therefore, we can effectively serve the correct path back to the consumer or the client, providing that we know what the equivalence is. So remember, a clip can only have one path stored against it in the database. So we can't have a Windows path and a Mac path, or a Windows path and a Linux path stored in the database. So therefore, this is where media stores becomes important. Now, that's not to say all of your paths in the database have to be of the same style. You can mix and match. That is allowable because some of your media might have been ingested on Windows. Some of it might have been ingested on a Mac as well. But remember, a clip can only have one path stored. So I've got another catalog here. And these clips have all been ingested on Windows. So if I go back to my system, I think it's my 4K footage catalog. Okay, I've got red lights again. Okay, bad news. So, I can't see the high res and I can't see the proxies, but I do know that those clips are there and they have proxies. So what I'm going to need to do is go into my media store configuration again. And this time I'm going to add the Windows equivalent path. So I'll just hide myself out the way again. So I'm going to click on my media store called Matthew and add a path. And then I'm going to add in the Windows path, which I'm running on a local machine. So it's on one of my drives. It's worth saying that for your Windows paths, you're going to want to use UNCs, okay? Generally, unless there's a really good reason to use drive letters, they can change. They might be different from machine to machine. So wherever possible, you don't want to be addressing, the Windows paths with drive letters. You want to be doing that with the UNC. So I've now effectively told my media store that there's another option now. Anything that lives in CatDV media could also be found in the sort of Linux Unix equivalent of mount storage media. So if I go back to my catalog and just hit the refresh, you should see that nearly all of the full res have now got green lights and come online. There are a couple of clips here that have got red traffic lights that they are genuinely offline. So I've pushed them to the S3 archive and deleted the files. So they've actually been pushed to archive. In fact, I think if I change my view, you'll see those. Yeah, some of those clips are archived. So you'll notice the proxies. I didn't need to add a Windows equivalent proxy at that point because the server is running on Linux. So the server knows where to go and get the proxies from. Okay, I've already determined where that is coming from. So just to kind of reinforce that, what we've done there is we've defined some equivalents. So we've said that mount storage media has an equivalent path of CatDV media in my system. As I say, ordinarily that bottom one would be a UNC. So we've defined some equivalents. So key concept 2, mixed platforms need multiple paths. So if I then open up my desktop client, and this is another common problem, people get their proxies working in the web, but then they're not working in their client. So if I connect to my server and I'm going to load my production group called demo. So now I'm in the desktop client and I go to my 4K footage catalog and I open it up. And again, you can see all the full res is online for everything apart from those 3 clips that I said are genuinely missing. But I don't have my proxies. So the client hasn't got access to the proxies. And the way the desktop client works is it doesn't go and get the proxies from the web server. It goes and gets them direct from the storage. There are ways you can configure it to do slightly different behaviors, but let's focus on the core behavior today, which is it will try and get those proxies from the storage wherever they are stored. So the problem I've got here is that my desktop client is running on Windows, my server is running on Linux, but I don't have a path equivalence for my proxy to tell it where to go and get that proxy file from. So what I need to do is I need to add another web proxy location, and it needs to be the Windows equivalent. So I'm going to go into here and I'm going to say web proxy, and I'm going to add in the Windows style path. Okay. So now I should see 2 paths, one for high res and 2 paths for proxy in my configuration. Sorry, if you missed the add button, it's because it's always behind my head, but it's down there bottom right if you missed it. So now, if I go back to my desktop client, the idea is I should just be able to close the catalog and reopen it, and it should now go and look for those proxies. There's a couple of things to watch that catch people out. So the first thing is the desktop client has existed long before media stores did. So you need to tell it to use media stores. So if I bring up my CatDV preferences, you just got the little preference icon there, and go to my media search paths, you'll see we've got some configuration in here. If you want it to use media stores, you need to enable this option here, use server 7 media stores. Okay, and you'll see there is a button here where you can go and look at the configuration of media stores. So that's the first thing you will need to do. The second thing is, and we'll talk more about targeting specific clients in a moment, if you want the desktop to use the web proxy location rather than a specific desktop proxy, then you need to check that second box. So that's not saying it's going to go and get it from the web server. That's just saying it's going to use the same path type that the server is using. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but you're muted, Dave. But
And that's important because you might want to, when you're on your desktop on an on-premise workflow, say you want the desktop client to use, say, ProRes proxies or mezzanines rather than web proxies. And you can do that. So the web client uses web proxies, desktop client uses kind of house format mezzanines. So you can do that, or as the tick box says, you could just use the web proxies if there are no specific desktop ones that have been set up.
But I think the thing that trips people up is they think it's going to go and get that proxy from the server, where actually it's going to try and access it from the storage. So if I've made sure those preferences are set, the second thing is if I'm in my desktop client and I've change some settings on the server or something like that, you can either close the client and reload it, or you need to click on your production group and say load group settings, and this will actually force it to reload its settings from the server. It doesn't do that continually in the background. So if I open up my 4K footage catalog now, you should see that I've got green lights for both my high res and my proxy files, and that's the client going and getting those files directly from the storage itself. So effectively what we did is we already had a Linux and Windows equivalent for high res, but the ice cream man's coming as well. That's good. Cakes are now ice cream, so it's making me even hungrier. So on the web proxy, we had the Linux equivalent, and then we've gone and added the Windows equivalent as well. You'll notice they have little no entry signs on them. That's because the server can't access that path, because I know I've said it a couple of times, I'm getting a bit repetitive, but it's running on Linux, so it can't access that Windows style path. So, and we talked about setting these preferences, so there's a slide there just for posterity in the replay as well. So we've defined another style of equivalence here. We've basically, rather than we've defined a proxy equivalent. So mount storage proxies equals CatDV proxies. They should be the same thing. If I did an ls or a dir or whatever your favorite command line tool is, in one of those, it should be the same as the other. That's the important thing about this equivalence. Key concept number 3 is multiple lookups are allowed. So this is the scenario that I would call my storage was migrated and my CatDV stopped working. So we sometimes get this coming as a support query as well. So if we take a look at, for example, a migration scenario, so the marketing department use CatDV, they've got a media store set up. And originally, when they ingested all of their content, it lived on some storage called My Old SAN, okay, in a folder marketing media. That's where the marketing department's stuff was. And that was all fine and everything worked. And, they've been using the system for 5 years, happy days. And then the IT department said, we're going to give you guys an upgrade and we're going to merge a couple of departments together. So we're going to migrate all your content to a new bit of storage. So into life sprung my new NAS. And they copied all the files over for you, so you didn't have to worry about that. But then you fired up CatDV the next day, and it was trying to go and find everything on My Old SAN, but My Old SAN had been switched off and put in the scrap heap, so couldn't find the media anymore. So one thing you can do is you can add an alternate lookup location. So here we've effectively said that these two paths have equivalence. And in the same way as before, what I'm saying is if I went and looked on the old SAN in marketing media, I should see exactly the same as if I look in new NAS department, marketing media. That's really important. But effectively, when the clients try and access the files, if they can't access the old one, they'll now go and try on the new path.
Yeah, and this should be used with caution, by the way. So we do come across systems that have got 10 or 20 of these path equivalents as subfolders are moved. If you're doing a full migration, there's an argument you should actually update the media path to the new location so everything's clean and can be done well. But it's a really good way of, after you've done a SAN migration, just to quickly move stuff over. So use with caution, can be really, really useful. Don't overuse it.
And probably the most elegant way is to go and update all your paths on your existing records. But if you've got a big system or something like that, that might take a little bit of time. So that's something I'd suggest maybe you engage either your reseller or our support guys to help with that as well. So just to show you, effectively, this was the path in the database. This is what's stored against that particular clip, My Old SAN marketing media. And then we've got a relative path again. So, it might be a couple of levels deep, but now we've given it an alternate high-res path that it can go and look up effectively. So this is a different sort of equivalence. This is an equivalent saying volumes old NAS. This is the Mac style path now. I didn't want the Mac users out there to feel left out. Volumes old NAS equals volumes new NAS. Okay. Obviously, if you're in a mixed environment, you're going to have to add that equivalence in both styles, when you add those lookup rules effectively. So that is key concept 3. The other thing that you can use with multiple lookups is a sort of tiered storage approach. And this is the way, some of our customers have structured their system. So, they've got some edit storage, really fast, SSDs, but maybe a bit limited in capacity. And that's where their high-res files live when they're editing. But at some point they finish the project. And we can talk about archive plugins. Obviously, we've got a whole suite of those, but that's not really the topic for today. So the way they do their archive is they've then got a sort of bigger but slower NAS somewhere else in the building where they go and move the content to. But effectively here, we're adding another level style of equivalence. So the files get moved, from the really fast SAN to the massive but slower NAS. But they should still live in the same relative path, and that concept is really, really important. Then when they come to use those files, say in the desktop client, it will obviously check the path in the database first, which is the top one. But then if it can't find the file there, it will go and look in the alternate lookup location. Now, that's not to say you need to have a bucket of proxies on both the SAN and the NAS. You could actually store them completely separately if you wanted on a completely different bit of storage. So we could have, my proxy storage as another target there. And effectively, it will look for the proxies in that location. And that's why that relative path becomes really important. So just to reiterate, obviously we had the path in the database, my really fast SAN masters, and it went to look for the files there. If it couldn't find it there, it will go and look at that alternate high-res path. And that works in the same way. The proxy path will be the same regardless in this example. Okay, it's not looking in two different places for the proxy in the example I've given. So then key concept 4 is different clients can be targeted. So this is what I call who's asking. So depending on which application or panel is asking for the content, you can target it with different files using the media store configuration. So in this example, we've got an original location, we've got our web proxy location, and we've also now added a different location for the desktop client. So you'll see it says proxy video and in brackets desktop. So when you're adding a path, these are what I call these path types effectively. So when you say add path onto a media store, that is these path types here. So you'll see there's one called proxy video desktop. There it is. I couldn't find it for a moment. So that means that the desktop client will try and use that location in preference for its proxies if you wanted for some reason to have a higher res proxy for the desktop client. Remember, if you checked the box in your preferences, let's just look at that again in media search paths. If you use proxies, if no specific desktop proxy are found, then it will fall back to looking at using the web path location if you haven't specified a desktop one. So that's one option. Another option would be, an NLE panel. We're going to talk about Premiere, but the same target applies to Final Cut as well. It's a different target, but you can target Final Cut specifically. So here I've got my high-res location on production storage masters. I've got my web proxies in production storage web proxies. But I've now got a high-res mezzanine, if you like, that Premiere is going to use. So I might have some media types in my masters folder that CatDV can understand, but you can't natively import into Premiere. So as part of your workflow, you ingest and then create a mezzanine format, say, I don't know, a ProRes file or something for use in Premiere. So they would live in that mezzanine folder, and then they would be served up went to the Premiere panel when the Premiere panel imported media. And also we can have a Premiere proxy. I suspect if you're using a mezzanine workflow, you probably wouldn't have a Premiere proxy as well, but I don't know, you might have a remote workflow and you might need it for that, in which case you might use your web proxy. Who knows? There's lots of, the key thing is this is very flexible. This allows you to, tailor CatDV to your workflow rather than saying this is the way you have to work. So this is all about targeting different clients. And then key concept 5 is that different types of ancillary files can be described. So, we've talked about who's asking. Now we're talking about what do you actually want. So do you want a proxy? Do you want a caption file? And effectively, that is another key concept of Media Store. And these are the different types of ancillary files that we can define. So you've got web proxies, which we talked about. A poster proxy is a sort of slightly higher resolution thumbnail for display when the clip first loads in the web browser. So when if I browse to a clip like this frame that's shown here initially will either be the proxy from the database, which, because they live in the database, we tend to keep them quite low res. Or if you use poster proxies, then it can be a high res still. In this case, it doesn't actually start using frames of video until you actually start scrubbing or press the play button. We talked a little bit about NLE, mezzanine, and proxies. Brian's going to come on to show you, but film strips. So I don't have any working in my system because I've completely trashed my media store configuration. But those are the sort of scrubbable proxies that you would have here when you sort of drag your mouse over. So Brian will show you how to get those up and running. Audio proxies and captions or subtitles, again, Brian's going to show you about. So we've got all these different types of ancillary files that we can target. And the way you do that with your media store configuration is by adding these different paths. So the path type becomes really important. You can see I've got one for audio and one for captions, for example. And you can actually create your own path types as well if you need a particular type of one. So let's go back to the slides. So this is a good example then of targeting different types of ancillary files. So my videos have got proxies in the web, but my other files don't. This is another common support query that sometimes comes through. So let's look. I've got a catalog called mixed footage. So if I go to my mixed footage catalog, and you will see that I've got a selection of things in here. So I've got 2 video files. I've got crocodile4.mp4. I've got this clip8.mp4. And then I've got 3 JPEGs. Okay. Remember, this media path here is the high res, the full res path in the database. So you might think, oh, well, maybe it's a Linux versus Windows issue. Some of those paths are Linux, some of them are Windows. Well, actually, if I look at my 2 video clips, they've both got 2 green lights. One is a Linux style and one is a Windows style. So we've already sorted that. So it's actually the stills that are the issue here. And this could be stills. It could be, PDFs. It could be different types of files. And it depends on the file type. Some file types we can create a meaningful proxy for. Others we can't. We just display a sort of basic icon. But stills are something we can create a proxy of and show it in the web. So what happens is when you have a path type of web proxy, it's actually looking for an MP4 file in that location. And for us to make an MP4 proxy of a still wouldn't make a lot of sense. So what we actually need to do is we need to go in there and add another path to our media store. So this is going to be of type web proxy stills. And you could put them in a different location, but unless there's a good reason not to, I tend to put mine in the same place as my video proxies. So I'm going to say mount storage proxies as the location for those. And I'm going to add the Windows equivalent as well. So CatDV proxies for my web proxy stills. So this is another path type that I've defined. If I go back to my catalog and refresh, you will now see I've got green lights for the proxies on my stills. If I click on one of those, you'll see this thumbnail that's loading here is actually that proxy. So this is targeting different types. So, and that's just showing what we've just configured on the slide. So key concept 6, and we're nearly through all the key concepts, so don't fear. But you can define multiple media stores, and this allows you to segment your media. And this might be because you've got different storage arrays, or it might be because you want different lookup rules. Based on that. So, the marketing department might not need to work with mezzanine files, but the production department might, for example. So by segmenting your media in this way with your media stores, it allows you to have flexible rules. So in this example here, I've got the marketing media store and I've got the production media store. So marketing, their high-res material is on the marketing NAS in a folder called masters, and the production team, their media is in production SAN masters, so 2 different locations there. But actually the proxies for both of them happen to live on another storage device called CatDV storage. And what we've done there is we've created a folder called proxies, or a share, called proxies, and one folder called marketing, one folder called production. And it's important, if you go for this style of configuration, that these are 2 different discrete locations. Okay, because remember, it goes back to that root part of the path and the relative part of the path. So the marketing proxies are going to live in here, and the production proxies are going to live in here. The other thing that you can do with multiple media stores is some of our archive plugins allow you to target different locations based on the media store that the media lives in. So to give that as an example, say you're using the Amazon S3 plugin that we have that allows you to automatically archive content to S3 buckets. What you can actually do is you can put a service path into your high-res location, and this is described in quite some detail in the guide that comes with the archive plugin. So if this is something you're interested in looking at, I'd suggest having a look at that PDF that comes with the plugin. But effectively, what we're saying here is the marketing department's media is going to be pushed to Amazon S3 using an account called Squarebox. Now, by account, what it means is it means the accounts that are set up in the plugin configuration here. So under Tools, I can manage my S3 archive. So you see I've got accounts here. It's this identifier here that's important, Squarebox, okay? But I could have, if I've got 5 or 6 different S3 API keys that I need, you could define multiple identifiers there. So yeah, and in this case, I'm using the same identifier, Squarebox, for my production and marketing. But what I'm doing is I'm targeting 2 different S3 buckets. So every bit of content from marketing is going to go into CatDV marketing bucket, and the content that's from production is going to go into the CatDV.production bucket. So this allows you to not have to push everything into the same place. There are other ways of doing this configuration as well. And we won't talk about it today, but it does allow you to back stuff out to a different location as well if the original place where that media was archived from has changed. So
that's useful. Sorry to interrupt, but that's useful for cost control. So if folks want to have a marketing budget for S3 storage that's different from the production team, then you can do that pretty easily. So it's a nice convenience.
And finally, I think it's final. I hope it's final. Key concept number 7 is don't overlap media stores, and this is kind of a big health warning here, in that when the logic that makes these media stores work, needs to be able to narrow down on a single media store and say this file belongs to this media store. So the configuration that I've created here is ambiguous. Okay. All my content was in NAS1 marketing, but then I don't know, maybe they decided we were going to draw a line under that and we're going to have new marketing and we're going to create a new folder within the marketing folder. It's not easy, it's impossible for us to tell which something that we find in the new folder. Does it belong to the marketing media store folder? Does it belong to the marketing media store, or does it belong to the marketing new media store? So it's really important that you don't overlap your media stores. That is a key concept. So they're the key concepts of media stores. We're going to cover the creation and best practices of creating the proxies, film strips, and mezzanines in another webinar. I mean, this is a meaty topic in itself, and there's lots, we can talk about profiles and things like that. But for those of you that are already au fait with the worker and know how to use it, but you want to start using media stores, I just wanted to highlight to you that you need to tell your watch actions that you're using media stores. So in your watch actions, you need to have that use media stores button checked in order for the worker to use that logic. And then a bit more of a demo, really. So we're going to have a look at Brian's setup, or rig, if you like, and he's going to just give another view on media store configuration. And we're going to look a bit at how you configure an audio proxy, a caption or subtitle proxy, and also talk a little bit about managing path types. And I think, unfortunately, Dave, we're going to have to save that final point for another day because I don't think we'll have time to look at that.
Teaser.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, hold it still right there, right there. There it is. Okay, that's good. Lock frame and bring in the jazz. Do we have the jazz? Turn up the jazz. Okay, great. Frame, action. Excellent. Perfect. Okay, guys, that's great. Take a break. I got to do a webinar real quick. Sorry about that. A little late. I'm just doing a shoot for a local cake company. They make some great gourmet cakes, and we just got the shot we need. Now, I run a production company, and I was just watching in the background, but Matthew shared some really great information, and I think that some of the stuff we've learned about media stores today is going to solve some of these business problems we've got. Because here's the thing, like I invested in this shared storage, right? Everyone said you're starting a production company, you need shared storage. So I invested in this big RAID. I got like an Accusys RAID. I hooked it up to a nice, server on the network that all the machines can see. And I call it the studio RAID. And that makes sense. But I've got this editor who works on a PC, and they always call it the Z drive. Actually, I've got American editors too who call it the Z drive. And then I've got some people that just call it the server. My reseller always wants to call it by the manufacturer name. So maybe setting up some media stores is really going to help us here. So actually, if I were to share my screen real quick, let's see what we've got. We've got my ATEM software control. So I've got some media stores set up here in the fashion that Matthew had advised on, right? And that is that I've got a server on Windows. So we know that the server, the best practice is to show the UNC path. What is UNC? Actually, I don't know what it stands for, but it is the sort of universal path where, like in Windows, we have those letter drives, and that's great for the users in their local space. But servers and letter drives, if you have any experience with it, the letters aren't always consistent. So I've got that UNC path set up on the server, and I can see my footage there. But because I've configured my media stores correctly, that means I should be able to look at this catalog on any system and see the same footage. So if I were to pop into CatDV here on the Mac and open that UNC paths catalog, you can see I can see all that footage as online, even though the media path reflects one of those UNC paths. Same way, you see I've got a few other catalogs here. I've got the same clips with their equivalent macOS paths to that same storage volume, right? There's in my case, it's called Volume Studio RAID on the Mac, but that same location from a Windows Server perspective is the IP address, because I didn't put a host name on, but the IP address of the server and the share. And then I've got those Windows editors, right? And they're actually mounting everything at the Z drive. So using media stores, I was able to set this up so that when I go out and shoot my cake footage, and actually I've already dragged it onto the SAN, I've called it Dave's Cake. I don't have to worry about where I'm pulling this in from or where I'm, which area of the server I'm putting it to. As long as it's on my shared storage, I can drag it into CatDV. There's Dave's Cake. And then from the, it's great. But from the, then automatically, because of the media store config, which I will show you in a second, I swear, we can view it from the web clients right away. And even if we go over to PC land and I reload this catalog, there we see Dave's Cake. Everything is online in green lights. With Mac OS paths in a Windows world, how are we doing this? Well, you already know how because you were just watching the presentation on media storage, but why don't we have a look at the underlying config that powers the capability of doing this? So here's my media store config. When I set the thing up originally, it was just Volumes Studio RAID, right? But when I put in my CatDV server, for that server to be able to see that media, I put in this path of 192.168.0. That's the server that hosts that share, right? And then for the local Windows clients to see it, I put in this Z or Z drive here. So between the three of these, no matter where you're looking at this thing from, you're going to be able to see the same files because these are all the same route. The relative path to the files from these points, from these perspectives, is all the same for the original high-res. Now, as Matthew pointed out, you can use this checkbox to say, well, which one of these can the server see? And I get the checkbox there on the UNC address. And this is exactly sort of what we expect, what we want to see here. But why am I getting that checkbox? Well, it's important to note that CatDV server only gets the permissions that you give to it. And it runs as a service account on Windows. So just a real quick nerd digression here. When you're configuring CatDV server on Windows, if you set it up normally out of the box, it comes as a local system service, like most other services get installed. That means that it can access your C drive, and say you plug in a USB drive or something, it could access that too, no problem. But most of us are setting up in that shared storage environment where there's network shares. So we need to make sure that we go to the CatDV server service and the worker service if we're running it as a service. And here in the properties logon, we want to give it that same user we're using to mount the share. Ideally, we would actually create a service account to run the whole thing under it in Windows. So we would be logged into Windows with the service account that has permissions to mount that share, and we would throw those permissions into the CatDV server service as well. So that's what allows us to see the media there.
That's a really good point, Brian. And another good reason not to use drive letters in that environment, because often they're mounted into the user workspace, and in Windows, the service isn't going to have access to those, drive letters that are mounted. So
right, but what having the drive letters in as a safety gives us is the capability, because I get this all the time. One of my editors will go on to the shared storage, and they'll just be on their local system, and so they've got this mounted as the Z or Z drive. And if they pull in Times Square, pull it into the wrong catalog, even whatever, Mac OS path. So they pull in this thing with the Z path. Well, that's great. They can see it. But it's because of the media stores that we can also, here on the server, we can see it. And on the Mac OS client, there it is. Right out of the gate, we can see it all. And that's because of the media store configuration. So if we
no, you're absolutely right. And I think a big troubleshooting step is people go onto the server, they go, oh, but I can access the media here. But but as soon as they check that show online status, they would see the server can't actually access that volume. So that's a really good tip. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the beauty of this is, no matter where the media originates, we can find it by saying, oh, if I want to find a video web proxy, then if the media path starts with Z, let's say, I can check, well, I'm the server, so I'd probably check this one first. And then it's the same relative path to the proxy file, right? That's how we find the proxy file based on the location of the master. You already went over stills. And then we have some other proxy types down here. There's the film strip, which is new for our Web 3. Actually, these are all new for our Web 3 release. Film strip, sidecar subtitle files, and audio files. So first, let's look at how we add these in. Out of the box, these aren't included as path types, but it's really easy to add them if we go down here to manage path types. Now, spoiler alert, I've already added them, but you can just say add, and when you add a path, you can customize a couple of things about it. So for film strips, we just set the media type as the film strip here. Here we can specifically declare that we're looking for JPEG files, which is traditionally what we would generate as a film strip. But if you were going to make PNGs or OMGs, apparently, as your film strips, that's fine too. I'm going to accelerate because we're 6 minutes to the top of the hour here. And then for subtitles, we can see VTT subtitle sidecar files. And that's great because it's a really flexible format. And from other subtitle or even caption formats, it's easy to sort of translate into VTT. So
and in the works at the moment is STL support as well on the fly. So we're going to be extending that list too.
Yeah, so just the way we are rendering video proxies, CatDV Worker can create the film strip proxies, you can make audio proxies, and you can use anything you want to make the VTTs. And we put them on the storage the same way. So if I go over to my storage real quick, I can see here I've got my subtitle tracks. And just the way we would do with our proxies, we build up the route to the actual path there. And there's our subtitle example. And so by linking that as a subtitle track, let's come back into the server and I'll show you what it does. Then just the way it searches and finds the video proxy for this, we get this little icon down here and we can throw on subtitles so we can listen to Dave and his dulcet tones when he talks about CatDV.
How to create your custom panels can be found in one of our other setup videos.
That's really cool. So then you could have somebody totally external who doesn't even know your CatDV exists contributing to the functionality of the server by providing VTT subtitle files. And then for audio tracks, just real quick, because I know we want to save some time for questions. When we are creating that path type, we can set up sort of a range of possible extensions. Now, with a bit more config, you can do this with different languages if you wanted to have it say, English, Spanish, French, or whatever for your selectors. But we think a really common basic use case will be to have numbers on the audio track. So here I've set a range of possible numbers to look for in my extension. We create the audio track proxy just the same way we create any other kind. So building up that path from the root at our proxy root, and there's our various audio tracks. So then what that gives us back in the player, and I'll just come back to our audio tracks, what that gives us in the player is selectable audio tracks. So in this case, I've got English.
With the release of CatDV Server 9 and our Web3 client application.
But I've also got Spanish.
Web 3 nos complace presentar el soporte para múltiples pistas de audio y subtítulos en CatDV.
Pretty cool, huh? So I know that was a bit of a whirlwind there, but the concept is that if we figure out what are the perspectives that we are going to need to our storage locations, so Mac, Windows UNC, and Windows for within the user space as well. And then we calculate those equivalent locations for proxies, film strips, subtitles, and audios. We can make sure that everybody can access everything from anywhere. And to just finish this off, we can all enjoy cake from anywhere.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Brian. That's another great perspective on the topic. Thank you. So I'm going to grab back screen sharing and just summarize. So that's what we've gone through. We've been through an overview with my house and cape and paths through houses example. We've been through the fundamentals and then some examples showing how all this stuff can be used in the real world. And then a bit of a conversation we had along the way about service permissions. And I think we've covered what we wanted to. So we will do a few Q&As. If you want to stay on for a few minutes after the top of the hour, then please do. You can always book a one-to-one with our You Can Book Me link that's here and will be in our email that follows up. Next week and for the month of August, we're going to be taking a bit of a holiday at CatDV. We have done, this will be the 15th, maybe 16th, I think. So all of the recordings are available to our website, which is behind me. And this is becoming an incredible library of media for training, for education about what CatDV does. We're loving having it, to be honest. And we are looking forward to being back in the fall or the autumn, depending on which part of the world you're in. So cool. Let's see if we can do a few Q&As. And if you want to stay on beyond the top of the hour, then please do. Hannah.
Yeah, of course. So we've had a few questions come in. Just a reminder, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So if you do want to send in any more as we're going through these, please do. So the first question that came in was, should I have a different media store for each storage volume?
Yes.
Simple.
Oh yeah, so just to clarify. So I did mine called Studio RAID, and that refers to one logical location, right? If I were to purchase another RAID, I would set up a new media store for that. But one thing that sometimes we hit is if you have a server that manages many shares, you will want to set up individual media stores for the shares themselves, because the server itself, that's just a server address. That's not a file path. Just a little clarification there. So each storage location.
So for some Avid storage and for our chums over at Facilis, they do that a lot. And so, yeah, having lots of media stores and getting a cool way of being able to create those when media volumes are created is a good practice. Yeah.
And the same person said they're having trouble adding paths to their second media store. So I guess, Dave, like you said, booking that You Can Book Me link or just reaching out to support@squarebox.com. The guys will be ready to help.
Yeah, in fact, our support team are the most excited they've been about any of our CatDV shows because they're hoping that in some cases we'll be able to point people at chapters of this on our support tickets. So,
I thought you said we were going to do some live support during the CatDV then, Dave. You got me worried. So.
Yeah.
So next question, I think the same person. When connecting over VPN, is there a way to set the desktop to find proxies over a web address and not a volume?
There is. You can use web desktop streaming proxies, they're called. Does anyone want to talk about those a bit?
Yeah, just in brief, they are configured in the server control panel. And essentially, if you have a web root that matches the relative path of your folder structure, %20s and all for the spaces and special characters and stuff, you could have the desktop client stream those proxies by defining it in the server config.
Yeah, so when you're booking up your You Can Book Me for next week, if you can put in the description that you'd like to talk about desktop streaming proxies, those specific words, then Hannah, if you could keep a lookout and make sure we get the right person on that can give a really good advice about setting those up, that would be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question, is it possible to store the thumbnails on storage rather on the server so it has similar paths to what you guys have been talking about so far?
Yeah.
You got it, Matt.
No, go, Brian. You're enjoying yourself, I can tell.
I was just going to say yes. There's not a point and click thing to enable it. There's a setting in the server, but if you just shoot out a support ticket, we can help you out getting that configured. That would be an edge usage case, storing the thumbnails outside of the database. So we want to maybe qualify and make sure that that's the solution.
Yeah, are we answering the right questions? I would definitely be asking at that point. So
there's also the post to proxy functionality as well. So there's two separate ways of doing that. One is you keep your proxies, very low in the database, but you then have the additional poster proxies, which are a form of proxy, which we touched on briefly. Or as Brian says, you completely move the thumbnails outside of the database. Yeah. There is functionality to do that, but it probably needs a bit of help on the deployment.
Yes, exactly. So on your ingest workflows, you just turn off the make proxy, the make thumbnail option entirely, and then you can use some of the mechanisms that Matthew and Brian have been showing to create them on file system if you want. But we are often asked to do that because people are saying, "Oh, I've got a CatDV system and we think it's running a bit slow," and so obviously the answer is to take the thumbnails out of the database. No, the answer is to ask our support team for some help, frankly, because our database rarely runs slow because of large numbers of thumbnail files in that database. It could be that your catalog structure needs optimizing if you're using the desktop client. It could be that the server doesn't have enough grunt. We rarely, in fact, I don't think there's been one case where we found that having lots of thumbnails have made the server slow. And I'm choosing my words quite carefully. But let's move on. And if you want to just, you can put me a call to validate with the support team whether you should be moving things out of the thumbnails out of the database and how to do it, then please book them up.
Thank you very much. Next question, will alias file pointers also be viewable in a file path as a valid path?
Nice.
Is that like a symbolic link, or I'm not quite sure?
Yeah, essentially, an alias or a symbolic link. Worker can do it, and I'm sure the desktop client's not far behind, but on the server, no, I don't think we follow symbolic links, symbolic paths.
Sounds about right.
Okay.
Which is good. Which is good because it would you would be looking at the configuration, seeing one thing where it's not really true. So sorry, just thinking of that.
No, you're good.
No, absolutely. I was thinking along similar lines. I was thinking why, because that's my usual question. Why? So yeah, if there's a way of avoiding them or doing different kind of path mappings instead, I mean, it could be one of those path equivalence things would work better. I think having one of our team have a bit of a ponder about your specific situation sounds like it would be a good idea. We might blow the "you can book me" links this week, Hannah.
Yes, I was going to say we're just getting some questions in about the link. You will be getting an email as soon as the video is ready to send out, and that email will also include the "you can book me" link. So that would be how you get hold of it. Next question: if someone is using Avid, is there a way to add a mezzanine storage path even though the relative path is different?
I don't know.
So I guess that's, I probably need to dive a bit more into that question. So with Avid workflows, there's a couple of different ways of working. So CatDV can have the high-res path as the high-res original media, or CatDV can have the high-res path as the Avid DNX mezzanine. So I think I'd need to understand a bit more.
Yeah, I think if they're coming in via the Avid bin reader, then we will maintain and preserve them. But I don't know whether we can add them. That would be if you want to do a "you can book me," you want to raise a support ticket, then we can get one of our Avid experts on. I'm not one of those.
And likewise, just for the previous question, because there's been a follow-up come in, again, just jump on the "you can book me" link and to talk about symbolic links. This is specifically looking at final cut files and workflows. And again, just pop that in the description, and I'll keep an eye out for your email and put you in touch with the right person to have that discussion. And final question that we've got in at the moment is it possible to retrieve media from archive to the original media store location?
Yep. So assuming we're talking about one of our archive plugins like S3 or Backblaze or Backgirl, it is possible via the plugin configuration to say how it interprets the media stores on restore. So a check of the README and a little look at the config. It's totally possible.
Yeah, it's a good point that's being raised actually, because when we do a restore, by default, we really, really, really want to restore it to the media path. The archive plugins in their first versions, only restored the original media path, because of course then if someone's got a Premiere project that refers to it, we want to be able for Premiere to be able to find it. So we didn't let people restore to alternate locations. We now do. We've got to be careful when restoring to different locations, because that might be creating content that's essentially unmanaged by CatDV, because CatDV wouldn't automatically ingest and index and then start to manage that duplicate copy of that media. So that's an interesting point, actually. Maybe we should have made that as we've gone through.
Wonderful. And I think that's all the questions we've had come in. So just a reminder, if you have any other questions or we didn't quite answer your question the way you wanted, please email in to support@squarebox.com or click the You Can Book Me link, which will be on the email coming to you shortly, and one of our team will get back to you. If you can try and just add a bit of a description about what you want to talk to them about, that means I can help connect you with the right person on our team. Otherwise, thank you all for taking time to join us, and we hope to see you again in the autumn when we restart our webinar series.
Very cool. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Matthew.
Bye-bye.
Good summer.
CatDV. TV for the cat.